and thank you for inviting me, Wales Audit Office, to participate in the webinar. I'm Julie Spargo and I'm Head of Cyber Resilience in the Welsh Government. We were just discussing prior to coming online, we're in an odd situation where cyber resilience and cyber security are not devolved matters, they're actually reserved matters and the province of the UK Cabinet Office. However, cyber touches on everybody and everything, and the Minister with a portfolio for cyber security and resilience in Wales is Rebecca Evans, the Minister for Finance and Trefniadau, and that's who we report to and work to. So thank you again, and I look forward to answering some of the questions.
Thanks, Julie. I'll come to you next, David.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, my name is David Jones. I'm currently a non-executive on 4 boards. I'm a non-executive on the Ofcom UK board, but in Wales, within the devolved world, I'm a non-executive on the Bydd Health Board, Qualifications Wales, the exam regulator for Wales, and also the WRA, the Welsh Revenue Authority, the tax body for Wales. So my job is a non-executive, so that means I do a couple of days a month, typically, in those organisations, and I tend to be the person at board that has responsibility for cyber security, hence where we are today.
Hi, I'm Gareth Lewis. I work for the IMT audit team at Audit Wales. I've also been part of the project team working on this cyber resilience study, of which this webinar is part of.
Thanks, Gareth. And Matt, I'll come to you next.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Jubb. I'm the head of IT for Audit Wales. So I lead a small team that looks after all of the internal IT that helps our auditors to do their work. So laptops, network engineering, and in particular cyber, with especially a practical and technical focus.
Brilliant, thanks Matthew. And finally, Steve.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, good afternoon everyone. My name's Steve Lyle. I'm an audit manager at Audit Wales. I'm managing the national study that Gareth mentioned on cyber resilience. And I'll just give a bit of introduction to the event today. So thanks again for everyone for beaming in. Thanks in particular for the panel. Really appreciate your input. Everything's in place now for a really useful session, so thanks very much. Just quickly on the aims for today. Today is about kind of sparking discussion and sharing learning about how public bodies are dealing with the challenges of cyber resilience. A secondary aim then is about promoting the study that we've just talked about. So later in the year we will publish a national report on cyber resilience. We will do more promotion at the time, so hopefully you won't miss that. But just so you're aware that the national study is covering high-level arrangements for cyber resilience in Wales, focusing mainly at board and senior management level. So we've chosen to focus on that a little bit of the scope, just to make the audit manageable, really. So that's just the rationale why we focused on board and senior management level. We're hoping the study will be impactful, so we're hoping to raise awareness of what good cyber resilience looks like. And ideally, we're hoping to inspire public bodies to make improvements to their arrangements. As part of that work, you might well know that we've been carrying out a survey of about 70 public bodies. Thanks again to anyone who's been involved in that. Hopefully that hasn't been too arduous, but the findings are really interesting. I'm actually going to be using some of those findings to frame our discussion today. But just a caveat on that, the findings that we are using are interim. They are subject to change a little bit. And a very final caveat, really. The discussion and answers we give today, some of it might be a bit high level and general. That's very deliberate because we obviously don't want to give away or expose any organisations to any frailties or additional threats. So that's why some of our answers or discussions might be at that kind of general high level. I hope that's understandable to everyone. And that's it. That's it for me. Thanks, Beth.
No, not really, given that the cyber threat remains high and vulnerabilities have increased due to the increase in home working, certainly since February, March time. I'm sure Olivia will say a little bit more later on about the specific current cyber threat. However, if there are a 100,000 unsuccessful attacks. Surely that's telling us something, that our cybersecurity and resilience are working to that degree. We do need to be clear, though, I think, about the differences between cyber attack stroke incident and an ICT failure. Sometimes it is almost an immediate assumption when something goes wrong, you know, the ICT stops working or something is happening in an organisation, that this must be a cyber incident or a cyber attack. That's not always the case. So I think careful categorising or categorisation and logging is very important to distinguish between the two. You'll be aware, I'm sure, that the MCSE categorises cyber incidents from a 1 to a 6. It is available to see the actual template of that on the MCSE's website. 1 is categorised as national catastrophic. We obviously have concern as Welsh Government about all levels, but a category 1, which we have not, thank goodness, yet experienced in the UK, category 2, or what we term category C3 high attacks, are those which can affect services in a very wide-ranging sense. Many of the 42 reported incidents may be at the lower levels, at a category 4 or category 5. They're still significant to the organisation concerned in terms of disrupting services. So it would be interesting, I think, if ever we could get to know, perhaps via the later report, what categories those 42 actually fell into. As Welsh Government, we've made funding available for tools, advice and information to assist in dealing with those lower levels of cyber incidents and attacks at sort of lower 3, 4, 5 levels. And we've been working largely through the Wales Walk group, the Warning, Advice and Reporting Point. It's a strange acronym, but for those of you who don't know, it's a very, very active group in Wales. There are walks right across the UK, and they consist of ICT service manager level from right across the public sector in Wales. Their membership is drawn from right across that cadre. And your walk member would be able to give board members or others details of what actually we've made available. It might also be worth reading the MCSE's annual report. There's quite a lot in there about the type of threat and incident. I don't want to steal Olivia's thunder on that. There's also a very good, fairly recent report from DCMS available on the gov.uk website. It is called the DCMS Security Breaches Survey.
When we were kind of coming up with a scope for this bit of work we've been doing and the survey and things, one thing we had to try and figure out and what to decide on was what definition of a cyber incident we used. So we ended up going with the MCSE's definition, which is, I'll read out, as a breach of a system's security policy in order to affect its integrity or availability and or the unauthorised access or attempted access to a system or systems in line with the Computer Misuse Act. So I was just wondering whether, because there is the potential for sort of varying definitions of an incident, does that or could that make it tricky for the reporting of incidents to the board in terms of the board knowing what types of things it wants to be reported up to them and what's classed as an incident? I don't know if anybody's got a view on that.
Yeah, David, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gareth, and I think probably the context to answer that question is maybe twofold. Part of it is that the breadth of, for people listening in, that the breadth of organisation size can be really varied. So, you know, taking my experience, I'm in the Arran Bevan Health Board. We've got about 14,000 FTEs there. You go down to some of the other organisations I sit on the board of, and it's below 100 FTEs. And the impact of that means that it is very easy on smaller organisations to have a complete view of the IT world. On a much larger organisation, you can imagine that it's significantly different. But probably the simple answer to your question, I think, comes in another context, which is that for so much of what board does and thinks, cybersecurity is still a relatively new area of discussion, and the kind of way in which people respond to cyber who are not experts in it is often the way that people can respond in a consumer context, which is to be really worried, to want to take extreme action, to assume you can throw money at a problem. Some of these kind of bits of thinking. So in answer to your question, my preference as a non-executive would be, give me everything that's happening. And if that means you're drowning me after the first couple of months of reporting, then we probably need to think about refining that a little bit. But if you get to a situation where, let's say on a monthly basis, you're reporting to board that perhaps you've got 3 or 4 situations where you're getting some spurious emails with some click-throughs that it's important that members of staff ignore, or perhaps you're getting some port sniffing that gets kicked around, then putting that in context of how serious those incidents can be is going to allow you to really start to understand the world of cyber. So at the point when you start to get hit with incidents that actually require some attention, such as some of the things that have come out in the survey, to be honest, you're going to start to have the board getting a bit more mature in terms of the way in which it can approach the whole issue. So again, summarising really quickly the point you're making, I would initially give everything to the board and then have the board go on a bit of a journey of understanding what the more serious attacks are. And on the way, they'll pick up the vocabulary and a lot of learning.
That's great. Thanks, David. Julie, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, David. Yes, it's a sort of wonderful description of how it should happen. And I think if perhaps everyone then uses those NCSE definitions and the terminology, and we all become used to using that, I certainly think that will help from a consistency point of view.
One of the things that I find quite valuable is if you're presented in a board report the range of incidents that are coming through, some of those are not going to be incidents in the sense of there was a risk, something bad happened, it probably wasn't really awful, but let's investigate it. I'll come to those in a second. Most of the things you're going to get are scenarios where potentially email might land and then get trapped and is not forwarded onto particular users. Some ports might get attacked in some way, but again, they're not going to get through because you've got good firewall configuration, let's say. So on the one hand, you're going to get a set of metrics that get presented to the board, which is of value. In terms of incidents, the things that I tend to find quite useful are, again, even on the smaller incidents, if you can get some formalized reporting on that. So what happened? Why did it happen? What kind of mitigation did we have in place that stopped that becoming a problem? And then a little bit of learning in terms of the organisation that can say, how can we make sure that if we can't stop this kind of incident happening again at source, at least we can make sure that our defences have got a multi-level to them. So even if the first set of defence is breached, then there's going to be something behind that. But I would say as well, though, that so often when you start to get these incidents reported, it doesn't take long at a board level until you realise that the kind of defence that we would normally think of in an IT world, which is often a CapEx type response, or you put a service in place, or you get some external third party providing something for you to do some monitoring, they really only get you to a certain level. It really is the training and awareness of staff that's fundamentally going to give the most robust way of being able to make sure that you're going to be a safe and more resilient organisation.
So a dedicated cyber resilience team as opposed to a team where you're kind of sharing roles with other responsibilities. Thinking about the pros and cons, looking at the pros, first of all, if you've got a dedicated team, well, that could be a way to ensure that particularly important activities, re cybersecurity, get done. and they don't get squeezed out by other business pressures or priorities. So, for example, one thing we might want to do as part of cyber resilience is establish logging. Olivia referred to the Logging Made Easy toolkit, and lots of security products generate logs. And it can be quite time consuming. Once you've established the logs, you need people to stay on top of those, look at artifacts that occur in the logs. Are they false positives? Are they normal? Or are you actually looking at something that's related to an incident that's in progress? So if you had a dedicated professional to do that, it might stop their time being taken up with competing priorities. So, for example, troubleshooting an application downtime or something like that. So it could be an advantage, sort of ring fencing the time, and it becomes more feasible the larger the organisation we're talking about. The cons, though, well, again, depending on the organisation and particularly its size, it might not be the most efficient way to ensure that the most important things with cybersecurity get done. So some of the practical, technical things you might want to do as part of cyber resilience might well share skills with operational IT. Network engineering often has a cyber component, so having kind of dual roles, if you like, might not be efficient, particularly in a medium-sized or smaller organisation, and it might actually, having a dedicated team might generate a false sense of security. You might think, well, we've got a team, they've got job roles with cyber in them, but I think what's more important than having the roles is whether those practical things are being done. Whether you've got the right culture, whether you've got staff who feel able to come forward and report and talk about cyber issues, training for colleagues, how do they spot malicious email, all of that good stuff that you can read about in the great detailed things that are on the NCSC's website. Finally, I think if you have got that dedicated team, I think people outside the team in the organisation might come to feel that cyber is the responsibility of that team. And not of colleagues at large. I think in reality, it's the responsibility of many people in the organisation. And Olivia mentioned the board toolkit, which I've read myself. I think it's an excellent primer to start to think about kind of the different roles that can help an organisation to go in the right direction on cyber resilience.
The risk, in a way, of complacency, of just knowing that from a board perspective, you can look down a spend, you can see a figure against cyber, you can see a headcount against cyber, and then you kind of move on because you didn't have those two people last year, or the spend last year was 50% less, and that gives a clue, I guess, of the risk thinking that often happens at board, because so much of what board needs to do is to think about what could go wrong. If it did go wrong, how bad would it be? And those are the kind of questions that apply to what would happen if we had a reputational risk in the organisation, what would happen if our chief executive were to leave, what would happen if we suddenly had an operational demand that was out of our current way of thinking about what could be expected, what would happen if there was a cyber attack that hit us really hard. Boards do that stuff all the time in terms of thinking about risk registers, and at the point when there's a colleague of Olivia's, Ian Levy, who's made a brilliant public statement about this a little while ago now, where he talked about the way in which sometimes the temptation is to think about spend, and organisations can put money towards cyber. And I think he used the phrase of a medieval amulet. He suggested that an organisation can buy this kind of slightly spiritual device which will give you protection from all these bad things happening, because of course we don't really understand what cyber is very well, and it's all a little bit ethereal, and you go to a vendor and you spend a whole ton of money on this thing, and that gives great assurance to the board, which of course is complete nonsense, because it's the real risk, and often risk related to people, where you've actually got to start your thinking in so many ways. So the only other comment I'll probably add in terms of team size, which again relates to one of the first points that Matt made, is the idea that if you tease away cyber from IT, then what you're deliberately doing is to try and stop it being essentially a technical discipline. And yes, there's a significant technical aspect to configuring a firewall or setting up your cloud servers in a certain way, but it's different to that. There's a much greater issue to do with governance and reporting, and this concept of risk that comes with it. So I've managed to successfully avoid answering the question that you asked me, I think, there, but hopefully given some reflections on those perspectives of risk. It's important to start with because you need to get the job done. You need somebody on the board who's going to be able to answer the questions, who's going to be able to take up the some of the questions that Olivia's mentioned that the board should be looking at. But in a sense, what you want to get to really is a position where it won't be necessary to have one particular member of the board. And this will take a few years to get there. One particular member of the board who's got responsibility. I see this through the lens almost of finance, where you could imagine that you might have a finance director sitting on a board, and she or he is going to have the responsibility for all the finance of the organisation for sure. But everybody else also needs to have a perspective on how finance affects every organisation. And I think we need to move to that particular place where everybody has got a base level understanding of where the cyber risk really is. But to begin with, absolutely yes, the fabulous work that NCSC are doing, the frameworks and the direction that they're putting out gets you to the place where at least you can begin asking some of these questions. But it's very much a journey, I think, rather than an end in itself. And just to reflect slightly on the previous question away about 56% of board members think they had a good understanding of the cyber threat. Well, what you don't want to do, in my view, is to get to the stage where you've got a member of a board who's got a very clear view of what the cyber threat's going to be, because for so much of what cyber tends to be, really, the idea of motive and almost the idea of attribution, these are really difficult concepts to get. I just remember about 3 years ago when the WannaCry attack happened. And it was a Friday afternoon, and this thing suddenly came out of nowhere. And there was a whole load of people at the time. I was deeply involved in one organisation at the time when that was kicking off. And for a good hour or so, we all thought that it was an attack on the NHS. And all that had really happened was that a bunch of NHS organisations happened to be the first one that became victims of that. And it's the same in a way with some of the ransomware attacks. It isn't that necessarily people who are devising ransomware feel that they're going to be specifically targeting certain organizations. They're going to have a toolkit available to them, and that they're almost going to be like the hoodlum who walks up the street trying all the door handles at night, you know, when of cars. When they see a car door that's open, then they're going to get in there. So that's just a reflection on, if you have low levels of cybersecurity setup, you really should expect that bad things are probably going to happen, and you just need to raise your game and keep doing those things. And these kind of questions and points, again, they're not technical things. They're all things to do with risk and understanding where the world is in cyber these days. So I think it's that kind of perspective at the board which is going to become more and more important.
Much as with having a dedicated cyber resilience team, you can imagine that having a specific budget for cybersecurity or cyber resilience could be a way of ring fencing particular projects or particular work that you think the organisation needs to do to take it in the direction it needs to go on cyber, so it doesn't get starved of funds by some competing business priority. Although David did refer to the medieval amulets and the dangers of spending a chunk of capital on an expensive thing of some kind, You might judge, for example, the organisation needs a SIEM. So let's say, which is a kind of logging type system. So we'll buy one, but of course by itself it doesn't create better security without skills, understanding, people with time to understand how it works, set it up, interpret what it's doing, what it's spewing out, etc. So having a specific budget, as David said earlier, is definitely not a kind of magic bullet for solving problems, but it may help in certain situations. In terms of a specific strategy for cyber resilience, I think most organisations have got some sort of business continuity plan or strategy. And if you're dealing with a cyber incident, so if you're facing an attack, I think dealing with a cyber incident does have some things in common with a generic business continuity issue. So you need some sort of structure, so senior management can assess facts on the ground quickly, make decisions. You need some communications. What do we say to staff? What do we say to the public, if anything, or the press? That said, I think there are clearly some specifics to cybersecurity. So the preventative work that we need to do to stop breaches happening, applying patches, when we're designing systems that are by their nature security critical, like systems that enable remote access, we need to make sure we're doing all of that right. And those are the kinds of things that I think you would be missing if you didn't have a specific strategy for cyber resilience. You might not call it that, but I think that thinking would need to exist somewhere in the organisation.
Go through the NCSC cybersecurity toolkit for boards. Just start there, work through that document. If that's the only thing you do, you've already done the most important thing, to be honest. Brilliantly written document, easy to understand. Start there.